This is your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask with your host, Dr. Judith Briles. On the show today, you'll find out where book publishing is going and how to take advantage of it. How to identify and avoid publishing predators. What opportunities are emerging as the book trade evolves in new forms. How to avoid losing money and much, much more. Join us now as a variety of publishing pros will deliver insights and strategies to take the author to the next level of publishing. It's your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. Brought to you by AuthorU and the Book Shepherd. And now, here's your host, Dr. Judith Briles.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back again to another sizzling week with my guest who I bet you a few of you have heard of. It's the first time I've had him, but I was so excited to discover that someone like this was out there. Today, we're going to look at ahas, insights, tips, and how-tos for both your author and book publishing success. And we are going to probe maybe on partially of the dark side of Amazon. With me is Chris McCabe. He's the owner and founder of E-Commerce Chris, LLC, an Amazon seller account consulting firm. Chris is formerly an investigation specialist for Amazon's seller performance team. And E-Commerce Chris is the first company founded by a former Amazonian, designed specifically to help suspended marketplace sellers. Ooh, Chris. Looks like they've been in jail or something. All right. So he helps sellers communicate effectively with Amazon to protect and, when necessary, save their businesses from the damage of suspensions. So, this is really deep and dark. Chris, I get emails. That's how I started tracking you down, from authors who are just having bad juju with Amazon sellers, plus some of the other Amazon-related things. And I kept saying, there's got to be someone out here who knows something and that can get us out of deep doo-doo. So glad to find you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro.
All right. So what is, I guess, where do we start here? How do you end up getting into suspension?
Right. And we primarily consult third-party sellers, but there are other kinds of suspensions in the Amazon ecosystem that we hear from people about.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a concept, how Amazon suspends you, what they want back, what kind of communication they expect. It's a concept that's very different from dealing with other kinds of companies. I mean, I think everyone appreciates that at this point, but for those that don't, Amazon's very much a my way or the highway company. And if they restrict you in any way or punish you for something or take something away from you that generates revenue, they expect you to deal with them on their terms, and it's not a two-way street. It's very much a one-way street. And that's why somebody like me who worked at the company for years understands that anyone that's suspended from doing something that engages with Amazon has to come in with the right mindset and has to understand that things like traditional business dispute resolution, things like fairness, what's just, what's unjust, you kind of have to put that off to the side and focus on what do they need from me and how do I get it into their hands so that this mess is over with.
And is there a timeline that you would expect that once you realize you have a problem to resolution? Is there kind of any average thing? I mean, we all would like it to be, with a blink of an eye, we got this taken care of.
The timeline varies depending on what they've done, what actions they've taken. Have they suspended a listing or your entire account, and why they've taken that action? Generally speaking, their timelines elongate whenever they're extremely busy or seeing delays and backlogs. If they've suspended numerous people for the same thing, for example, whether it's, shipping packages late, or they've suspended people for listing particular items the wrong way that broke their rules and created violations that they had to enforce, that creates one team that has to sift through a giant pile of seller accounts before they get to yours. That also means that the number of appeals suddenly spike, and it takes them longer than whatever time frame they promised. They might say, we'll get back to you in 48 hours. We see all sorts of broken promises on the timelines, right? 48 hours, 72 hours. Sometimes they're more honest, and they say this will take a week for us to review and get back to you. But that's exceptional. Usually they promise a response within a certain time frame, and then they don't respond at all, no matter how long you wait, or they do eventually respond, but many days later. That's extremely common with almost every Amazon team we've dealt with. So they go at their own pace.
Yeah,
not your pace. They go at their pace. Yeah.
And we want our own pace. I get that.
Right.
So with, I guess the belief is that are they dealing with just the bots, or is there really a human person looking stuff over?
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding around who is responding to appeals. Obviously, we're experts on the appeals process because I used to manage the appeal and reinstatement process when I worked at Amazon. I was one of the people in charge of deciding what kind of messaging goes out and what kind of cases. They're not bots. They're generically written messages that a person is deciding to send to you. The only bot-generated or automated messaging you see is if there's an automated email that goes out to everyone who's selling a particular product that has to be alerted to an update, for example. Or let's say something you're selling is suddenly considered a restricted product. They reclassified it as a restricted product. So a bot would go out to everyone selling that item or similar items saying you can no longer list this based on our updates to restricted product policies. Those are the bots. The messages you get when you write to my former teams, collectively known as seller performance, but let's just say performance evaluation or policy enforcement teams, those are pre-written messages that a person is deciding to send, possibly amending certain pieces of it that are between brackets, to cite a specific ASIN or a specific product or a title of something. But beyond those minor changes, the body of the message has been composed previously, and they're pre-written blurbs that a person is basically choosing out of a drop-down menu to send to you. So that's not really a bot. Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it's the old copy-paste thing.
It's generic canned messaging, which is what drives so many third-party sellers crazy, because some of them spend a lot of time and effort and energy on a well-crafted appeal with some real strategy. I mean, we work with some sellers just on a 1-hour basis if they have a few questions and want some coaching, but they're doing the appeals themselves. They write something good, it goes in, and they get a copy and paste message back, which says the exact same thing as the message that prompted them to write the appeal in the first place. That's very common.
So what do you do?
When Amazon decides not to communicate with you in any meaningful way, whether it's silent, that you don't get any response, or you get a response that's canned, copy and paste over and over, you have to start finding other avenues of getting their attention. And that's why suspended companies, or not just third-party sellers, anyone who's suspended from doing anything on Amazon that gets ignored, or Amazon says, this is our final say, this is our final word, go away. Some of them take to Twitter. They start posting things on Facebook. They look people up like executives on LinkedIn. Sometimes even just people reading the news. I mean, this week in particular, there have been stories about Amazon doing research on private label brands that sell on their site, trying to copy them, trying to create their own products that are duplicates.
I saw that. I saw that.
And I've spoken with the reporter, Annie Palmer at CNBC, did a story that ran, I think, Monday morning, covering that. And, some of these stories cite specific executives that are senior VPs or they're high-level Amazonians that maybe you can't message them on LinkedIn, but you can try to find other ways of contacting these people, or you can reference them in public posts, because Amazon employees and staff are out there answering tweets, looking at Amazon's Facebook page, occasionally answering LinkedIn messages on behalf of their superior, their manager, their VP, whoever they report to. Sometimes they have to answer their emails and go through their inbox whenever there's an issue that's flagged because the team that's supposed to be helping you or responding to you has stopped doing it. With Amazon, unfortunately, a lot of times those teams deliberately don't answer things even though they're supposed to. So you have to sort of call them out to a higher authority and say, I've already been through your protocols. I've already talked to the teams relevant, and they haven't taken the time to review my case, more or less. It doesn't have to be a long message when you contact these people.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a situation similar to, wasn't a seller account. It dealt with another one of the accounts that she could, all of a sudden, they wouldn't let her get into her account. And she had sold a lot of books on Amazon. And I said, okay, let's go find out. And I got all the handles on Twitter for all the executives. And we went after them that way. And by God, we got their attention. I mean, we got somebody's attention who was doing the monitoring. So what I'm hearing you say, Chris, is there is actually, which makes me feel better when I do this kind of stuff, there is someone who monitors and execs, is their eyeballs, so to speak, and brings it to their attention if they feel warranted. Is that kind of how it works?
Especially if it's publicly posted. Amazon's preference is that all of this is behind closed doors in their messaging system or even via email with their email queues, and that none of it is publicly discussed, and that you don't see too many people posting things that are related to each other. This happened to me, it happened to me as well. No one's answering us. We tried escalating it. That was ignored. They don't want that kicked around and discussed on Reddit threads or on Twitter, social media channels, or anywhere really in the news. I mean, they're very conscious of news coverage of the company, especially these days.
Yes.
So unfortunately, people have been forced to do this because following their designated channels and protocols doesn't work. Either it wasn't properly handled, somebody hands it off to somebody else, it gets fumbled along the way, kicked off to the side. I mean, those are extremely common occurrences. And the company is aware of that. Yeah.
They are aware of it. So what we have to do is figure out how to work with it. All right. With me is Chris McCade, and he is with e-commerce Chris, and a former Amazonian who is giving him some insider tips. If you've been in Amazon jail, pay attention. We'll be right back.
This is your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. With your host, Dr. Judith Briles. And we'll be right back with more great information right after these.
Is there a book in you? Or another? AuthorU shows you how to create, develop, and publish your book without being hoodwinked. If you already have a book out, you will find a supportive and brainstorming community that is connected and creative, no matter where you live. AuthorU brings in national experts for its book camps and annual AuthorU extravaganza. It has regular meetings and delivers webinars for its members on timely topics. Through AuthorU's extensive network, members enjoy exclusive benefits, including significant discounts for a variety of services necessary to publishing. AuthorU is the premier authoring resource in the country, creating community, education, guidance, vision, and success for the serious author. If you want to create a book that has pizzazz, punch, and panache, AuthorU is for you. Timely author and publishing tips and articles are posted on its social media platforms, and it is free. Discover AuthorU, where authors go to become seriously successful. Join AuthorU today at AuthorU.org.
Welcome back to your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. If you want to write and publish a book, if you want to be successful as an author, your guide to book publishing, everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask, is for you. Stay tuned and you'll hear about statistics, scenarios, and strategies on what to do now to get you published. So let's get back to the show. And here again is your host, Dr. Judith Briles.
Hello, everyone. With me is Chris McCabe, and you can find him if you're having problems, especially with the Amazon seller stuff. He's the one to go to, and all you have to go to is ecommercechris.com and start the communication that way. All right, so we're in jail. We're in Amazon jail. So, this step-by-step, Chris, where would we start on starting to, how much patience, and of course, our audience is authors, how much patience should a seller of a product, a book's a product, have before they hit the Twitter sphere, which I would do immediately?
You don't have to do it immediately. I should hasten to add that be sure before you escalate anything, whether it's publicly or using their systems privately, make sure you're giving them what they're actually asking you for. I can't tell you how many sellers and businesses we consult who show us what they've sent to Amazon, and it's not even what they were supposed to be sending in the first place. So the escalation paths that I was referencing earlier mostly refer to people who have all their ducks in a row and have their game tight, and they're submitting what they've been asked to submit, but they're not getting a response, and they're just being ignored, or they're just receiving copy and paste. We need more information, we need more details, which Amazon loves to send both of those messages without saying which details or which information is missing. Make sure you're sending them quality material, especially when it comes to an appeal for reinstatement. Otherwise, you don't really have a basis for escalating it. If you did escalate something prematurely and you sent it to one of these channels, or even, let's say, got the attention of an executive on Twitter, and then they delegated that to one of their staff, if they look at the appeal that you were asked to present and it's only like 50% there or 30% there, or it's not really quality, easy to understand material, then the escalation hasn't done you any good because you've given them an excuse to reject you and ignore you. So I had to create a 30-minute consult on my site just to look at things for people before they sent them, to give them a yay or nay. Yes, this is what they're asking you for, or no, this is missing details, or even sometimes just this is very difficult to understand the way it's written. Hopefully with your audience, this isn't so much of a problem, but some business owners in the Amazon third-party seller space are not wonderful writers. They're not wonderful communicators sometimes. And we have to reshape the material before they send it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had one client who had over 30 emails going back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I just finally said, enough is enough. Here's where, and that's where I hit social media. And I said, let me write this for you.
Right. Oh, especially the social media, like tweets have to be written in a very particular way. So certain phraseology, you've only got, I don't know, is it 180 characters? I always forget how many characters they give you.
We have 280 now, but yeah, right. But of course that's you include your handles and you include any keywords and hashtags and all those things in there too.
Exactly. So you have to understand how to be succinct. It's not just Twitter. Wherever you're posting online, whoever's reading it, they will read it, but they'll read it very quickly. So their eyes have to grab onto certain names of people you've appealed to before that have ignored you, names of teams, sometimes names of an email queue, but that can be kind of long if you're talking about a tweet. So you have to keep it short and sweet, but with actionable details and info.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, one time I was going crazy. This wasn't an Amazon. It was an Ingram Spark problem. Mm-hmm. And I finally pushed out the social media and I said, girls don't like to be stood up.
Interesting way of looking at it, but yeah, that's kind of the concept, right? You're being ignored when somebody sort of promised to do something with you or for you. Yeah.
And I want you to know I had a phone call in an hour from the fixer. So sometimes a little catchy, might do it, but then you tell them why we were stood up, and then I go after it that way. But all right, so teams. So if you're going to go the social media route after you've exhausted, I'm hearing you need to exhaust. But at what point do we say I'm exhausted?
Well, and also you have to understand that most of what Amazon resolves or deals, how they deal with other parties, is not on the phone. People like to make phone calls. Some of it's just business practice from years of prior business off Amazon and doing business that way. But the way business like this is resolved, these types of internal teams don't want to talk to you. The ones that do want to talk to you that are publicly facing, that have phone support, have the least ability to help you. and the least training and the least knowledge. So you might feel better talking to someone, but usually you're wasting your time making yourself feel better. But the person on the other end of the line, unless it's a very specific catalog issue, you've listed something for sale on Amazon that has to be tweaked a little bit, or you've got a technical issue, something kind of very specific like that, you do need a rep who has some familiarity with how the catalog works and how you list things, or you need a catalog team to describe to you why something you're trying isn't working. But for everything suspension or appeal related, when you've been restricted in some way or you've been shut down, none of that happens on the phone. So that's the first thing I usually say when I appear at conferences and people say, how do I talk to these guys? How do I communicate with Amazon teams? My team, Seller Performance, was never on the phone with anyone. It was all in writing. And that's why whoever at your company or whoever represents you is the best as a writer. You want them to understand the kinds of communication that Amazon wants to see, but also it has to be intelligible and it has to make sense and it has to be succinct. Otherwise, you're giving them an excuse to ignore it. And if you start saying, well, we called on this date and here's my case number, and I called on another date and here's my ticket number, their eyes just glaze over because they're never going to take the time to look up all these cases and ticket numbers. They need it right there in front of them in either bulleted lists, like a timeline almost, or in very short, very succinct paragraphs.
So I think that's a mistake. I think a lot of people do the recitation of all the tickets and things going back and forth. I've seen that. And you're saying, no, that's the killer.
Sometimes I say it's okay to put a case number or a ticket number in the subject line of an email just so that they have a starting point, but only if it's a case or ticket number that is short, that they can review very quickly, and it's easy to understand exactly what is going on. Then it's okay, just as a starting point, but not I went here, because what the tendency is for people to become, complaint heavy with it. And they start saying, well, we talked to them and they were useless, and we talked to this other team and they didn't help us. And they start focusing on all the things that Amazon did wrong, and they get off topic, which is, how do I fix this? How do I resolve it? I've been to all these other teams. It's fine to say that you've been working on it for a while, but you have to say, I need this, this, and this, and I've given you what you asked me for, but there hasn't been any action taken. That's the meat of the issue, and that's what they're looking for. They're not going to spend time going through all these cases when they open the email from you. So,
would there be, Chris, any time an assumption, if you use that line, I gave you this, this, and this, and I need this resolved, that they will actually skip over and try to get it resolved?
Well, I mean, if you also present information on what you're going to do next if you don't get a response or if you don't get it fixed on this path, sometimes they'll know, okay, they're just about to escalate this. So if I don't handle it appropriately, my boss might see that I didn't handle it appropriately. So that gives them the incentive to take the extra time to review it properly on this path, this time. So that helps. And whether you put that as the very last line, sometimes you lead with it. It depends on the situation. I mean, I'm not really into templates or blueprints for every single scenario. Some people lead with that, and some people put it at the end. But the bottom line is you have it in there, and it's, I've tried to resolve this using everything you've either asked me for or you've told me to do. I did both. I either haven't been receiving responses or I received generic copy and paste responses and the problem isn't solved. That tells me that a higher power, a higher authority needs to resolve this for me within these chains of command. And if that fails, I need to go to somebody else. So that helps them understand that you're going to keep coming back. You have to sort of be the zombie of the undead and leave them with the impression that you're not going away quietly. That's what motivates them to move.
So when you say I'm going to a higher authority, is this where we go to social media and the names of people, or is there another higher authority I don't know about?
Right. I mean, it used to be hard, other than just looking people up on LinkedIn, to find out who's in charge of what.
Yeah.
And Amazon deliberately muddies those waters with a lot of LinkedIn titles for executives aren't really what they do. They're just there to kind of have a title. A lot of reporters have discovered this the hard way by trying to quote people and list their title in a story, and the title might be fabricated. That's deliberate. Amazon doesn't want everyone to know what everyone's doing all the time. So you can't go by titles necessarily. But that's the bad news, I guess. The good news is that the names are becoming part of what's commonly discussed in media circles. Some of them have testified in front of Congress. Some of them write blogs for Amazon, so they'll actually be the author. I don't know how often you read Amazon's blog, but they are authors. Some of the senior VPs are authors of the Amazon blog, and they comment on seller issues or marketplace problems, maybe sometimes even the antitrust investigation and so forth. So a lot of these higher level executives are publicly known now. And in some cases, you even know who they report to based on media reporting and reading CNBC and Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal. You start seeing some of the same names, and you understand who's in charge of what. And that's what we've encouraged people to investigate, because that can produce results down the road when you're sending emails. You might not have somebody's direct email address, but you know how to reference them when you're bringing up a failure of Amazon's teams or tools in your correspondence with different teams at the company.
I love that. Here's the other one I'm going to throw out to everyone. Get a hold of their annual report. Lots of names are listed in it. And there's
a lot of resources out there.
Yeah. And if they've made the annual report, they have some clout. I'm just going to say.
Right. Right. And also books. I mean, now we're starting to see books. Brad Stone wrote a follow-up to the Everything Store book, which I think was 2012 or 2011 when he was originally writing that. He published another book. Brad Stone's the managing editor at Bloomberg Business. So he wrote Amazon Unbound, and there were people cited. There were several top-level executives named in that book that he either wrote about, maybe some of them he spoke to directly and quoted. But they're well-known names to people who have to deal with dispute resolution, escalation, appeals, and so forth. Those are people who have already proven to be known commodities for resolving things in the past. Simply,
all right, hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. We need to take one more break. Coming up with me is Chris McCabe, and we're talking about Amazon snafus.
This is your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. With your host, Dr. Judith Briles. And we'll be right back with more great information right after these.
Discover the power of you and your book at the Judith Briles Unplugged events. Each summer, Judith Briles Book Marketing Unplugged unfolds over 3 intensive days working with just Judith. You get publishing strategies, author and book platforms, book marketing panache and pizzazz, and authoring tools to take you and your book to rock star success. In the fall and winter, Judith Briles Speaking Unplugged includes Judith as your coach and mentor during 2 powerful days. You will learn how to structure a speech, how to create openings and closings, how to find gigs that pay you and sell your books, and you will get one-on-one coaching. Go to thebookshepherd.com and click on the Events tab to learn how to participate at the next Unplugged Workshop event.
Welcome back to your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. Coming up, you'll hear more about statistics, scenarios, and strategies on what to do now to get you published. So let's get back to the show. And here again is your host, Dr. Judith Briles.
All right, today's episode is all about Amazon problems, and if what happens as you as a seller and so many authors, unless you are exclusively doing the KDP print on demand or ebook and or both side, that you don't worry too much about that kind of problem on it, except you're dealing with just maybe fixing things, tweaking things, or your detail page. But if you are producing a book, or you're creating your own inventory, and you're going through the other portal, which is the Amazon seller, it's there are hiccups there. And Chris, curious, with me is Chris McCabe of e-commerce Chris, a former Amazonian, so he's been on the inside and knows where some of those hiccups are. What would be the most common ones that an author might run into?
We've seen mostly rights ownership issues with authors that have contacted us. Some people say, hey, Amazon's selling this stuff. I submitted the necessary documentation. This infringes upon my intellectual property. And the other party produces information that Amazon accepts, saying that the rights ownership wasn't infringed upon. So we've seen rights ownership disputes. That's primarily, something that we guide people to an IP attorney to resolve, not necessarily us, since we're not attorneys. But that's what I most often hear about is, hey, somebody's using my content without my permission. I flagged this and sent it to Amazon, and they're not responding or they're not doing anything. It probably means it's been transferred to a different team or to a different person, and it went there just to kind of rot, and nobody looked at it, and that's why it hasn't been actioned, or no one took any action upon it. So,
I'm
rights ownership.
Yeah. Well, piracy's big. And I'm right now, one of my clients has her book so totally ripped up, duplicated by people in multiple countries. Multiple.
That's the other issue, right? When it's international, it's harder to go after people in U.S. courts for international entities that may not be knowable or might not care what the repercussions might be. So we've seen that, and then we've seen authors get in trouble for offering too much bonus content. I heard from a lot of people. I think that was more Kindle publishing related, but they were being punished for offering too many pieces of bonus content, and that infringed, that broke the rules at Amazon. So they took their Kindle accounts away, KDP accounts.
So is the rule, well, I need to understand this. I mean, I don't have the bonus thing, but I know some people do offer it. So Amazon is the rule say you don't offer bonus, you just offer your product?
I mean, pretty much. I haven't studied it recently. This was a couple of years ago, so I caution people, to look this current information up in the KDP rules for Kindle publishing. But yes, people were offering too many, I guess, freebies, and that was considered an abusive policy. So they actually signed them out of their accounts, and they came to me for help. This is another kind of quirk that's interesting about Amazon. They didn't necessarily want to get back into the account to continue what they were doing before. They just wanted the proceeds, the funds. And Amazon held their funds more or less permanently because they considered them abusers of the rules and bad players, bad faith actors. And this is something Amazon's become well known for with marketplace sellers as well. If they suspend an account, whether or not it's, fully justified or reasonable, if they deny your appeals, if you're never reinstated and you just sit at home waiting for your money, you often don't receive it. They keep it because they classify that under a kind of fraud. And if there are funds produced by fraudulent transactions that involve Amazon, typically Amazon freezes those funds and later absorbs them themselves, and they do not disperse that money. That's been extremely controversial.
Wow. I wonder how much money's been involved.
At this point, hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not sure how it shows up on their balance sheet, but you may or may not have heard in the news about, I think it was around July 3rd, Amazon suspended numerous very large Chinese seller accounts, sellers that were selling in .com in USA. They suspended their accounts for abusing the product reviews, so buyers looking at product reviews that were fake, and heavy amounts of 5-star reviews, sometimes hundreds or thousands of 5-star reviews. Instead of just deleting all the reviews for being illegitimate or illicitly gained, Amazon took their account away entirely. And when they did that, they signed them out of their accounts and refused to correspond with them in any way, which means that any inventory that those sellers had in Amazon fulfillment centers, they probably couldn't generate a removal order and get it out, whatever the value of that inventory was. And they also could not disperse whatever funds were owed to them at that time, because it's considered a code of conduct violation. What that generally means is they consider it a fraudulent a situation where fraudulent activity has taken place, and Amazon does not disperse that money, and they justify keeping it. And a lawsuit was created by, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 60 Chinese sellers. They were probably large accounts where the money was worth chasing. There's a lawsuit that I think dropped last week, something of a class action type lawsuit to get their money back. They're not even interested in selling on Amazon anymore. They just want the final funds dispersed, and they can't get it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a wow.
Yep. And it's not just, it's not just Chinese sellers. That's just one case. Obviously, we deal mostly with U.S. and European-based sellers who are having the same problem. So it's not just, somebody based in China who is faking product reviews. We hear from sellers all over the world all the time saying they can't get their final funds out of Amazon. So this is sort of another occasion where they come to us asking if they should go to arbitration. You can't sue Amazon. You've already agreed not to sue them in their terms of service when you start. So your arbitration or something else, right? If you can't get reinstated. So if you decide not to take the arbitration path, you have to get their attention in other ways, similar to what we were discussing before.
So the bad mouthing may be the most effective to get something out of them. That's what I'm hearing almost.
Right. Typically, you're not going to court. I mean, a class action suit just to recover final funds might be an aberration, but there's arbitrators and mediators that get involved in these disputes that maybe sometimes they give you some of the money they owe you just to resolve it. Mm-hmm. Some sellers tell me that they recoup all of their funds through the arbitration process, and then, of course, still others don't receive any of it even after arbitration, which may mean that Amazon had some pretty damning evidence on them.
Well, I was absolutely unaware. And why we've been talking, I've ordered Brad Stone's book. But why we've been, I'm appalled that you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars have been frozen. Now, some absolutely could be so legitimate that, get those bad people. But I'm wondering how many got caught in the vice that, just were clueless with what was going on. I always wonder about that.
Yeah, I mean, technically you are committing fraud if you're faking reviews, product reviews on the site. That's why the FTC is so interested in fake product reviews on Amazon. But what I don't understand is where the money, if the money's frozen, why wouldn't it be redistributed among the buyers from that third-party seller? Or why doesn't it go into a well-marked fund for fraud prevention or for charity or for something? Amazon is completely opaque about where that money goes. Does it just go straight back into their coffers? I understand that funds would be frozen in a fraud situation, but where that money ends up is the great,
mystery.
The great mystery at this point. Yeah.
It may be in space. Oh, well. Okay, here we go. So
it goes to Blue Origin. Maybe you're onto something. It ends up in Blue Origin's rocket fuel. I think you're right.
Okay, so let's talk about, you gave me some bullets, and I wanted to make sure we kiss them before we leave it. So what are the top 3 suspension trends and account levels that get hit?
Right. So at this time of year especially, it can take a long time to appeal and resolve an account suspension. So it's important for every seller to understand that the top 3 ways that they could get suspended. Working off of what I was saying a minute ago about reviews abuse, I know a lot of sellers are too smart and savvy to do something like that these days. But any policy violation, even when you're just trying to list a product, make sure you're following the rules. Don't just look at what other people are doing on Amazon and assume that means it's compliant or it obeys the rules, and do the same thing yourself. Because we hear from a lot of sellers that look live on the site, some seller in their category, they see them listing a certain way, they copy it, and then they both end up getting into trouble. So you can't judge based on that. You have to interpret Amazon's listing policies and all policies, good behavior policies. You have to interpret them the proper way. Also, performance metrics. This is a big one at this time of year. Late shipment, canceling orders, drop shipping where you don't have the inventory on site. You're sourcing it from a third party and hoping and praying they ship it on time for you. Stockouts are anathema to everything Amazon's about now. So you have to have really tight control over your supply chain. And you have to work with vendors who ship on time. You certainly can't mark orders as shipped on time if they haven't been, just because you're hoping they ship on time. A lot of sellers are doing that right now, and they're getting punished a lot more harshly than they expected. And maybe it was a desperation move, and they were sourcing product at the last minute that they were hoping would get to the buyers on time. But, we're living in a world where Amazon's trying to move from 2-day Prime to 1-day Prime. So they're extremely serious about this stuff.
So stock, I have a big explanation. Stockouts are taboo. They're taboo. You've got to make sure you got to stay on top of that all the time. And whoever is shipping for you, if it's not you, as soon as those orders go in, you better get them out. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct?
For sure. A lot of sellers have suppliers that they're counting on to ship on time. So the items might ship, but you can't prematurely mark an item as shipped on time and then just hope and pray that the other party, the drop shipper or whatever the vendor's doing to fulfill your order, gets it out when they tell you whatever they promise you that they'll get certain orders out. They have to meet those metrics and that criteria. Otherwise, you have to switch to a different vendor. I mean, you can't switch to a different vendor maybe now in Q4, but you also just can't trust that they will fulfill all of their obligations and let the entire fate of your business rest in their hands.
And it is scary. The other thing is, I know that the vendor I use who does our shipping gets them out within 24 hours. That's their policy. Everything goes out within hopefully same day or 24 hours. But that by the time they get to Amazon, of course, we've got all these delays now in shipping. That's not hard to see happening.
That's the other thing. Yeah.
That's a scary thing. And then it gets in there. Does Amazon immediately clock it in? Because it doesn't show sometimes for another week that it's available. And I think that's a concern. And with that, we're going to take our next break. And Chris, if you'll come back, and I would love to have you talk about protecting our brands from competitor attacks. And last but not least, what we should know about the holiday season that's upon us right now. We'll be right back. It's AuthorU, your guide to book publishing, and I'm Judith Briles.
This is your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. With your host, Dr. Judith Briles. And we'll be right back with more great information right after these.
Are you confused about publishing options? Do you know which printing option is best for your book? Does your stomach flip when you think about selling books? Or do you feel overwhelmed with what to do about book marketing and publicity? Get the answers and much more. Get them and from someone who knows publishing inside and out from both the traditional and independent sides, how to make a successful book. You can't do it alone without paying the price. You can spend your money creating a book that turns out to be so-so, or you can create a book that looks and feels classy, builds your brand and platform, and is a success, a bestseller. It is your choice. You choose. If you want author and publishing success, you want Judith Briles as your book coach. Sign up for her weekly blogs and e-zine at thebookshepherd.com. The book shepherding concept is simple. The publishing world is changing, and so must you. You need an experienced shepherd and guide to collaborate with you as you create, strategize, develop, publish, and achieve your publishing goals. Publishing is riddled with obstacles, sometimes nightmares for the author. You do not need more problems. You want solutions. Dr. Judith Briles will shepherd you through the maze and chaos. At times, she has had to step in and rescue a book. A book that has been sabotaged by a publisher, by a publishing service provider, and sometimes even by the author. If you want author and book success, connect with her today at thebookshepherd.com.
Welcome back to your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. If you want to write and publish a book, if you want to be successful as an author, your guide to book publishing, everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask, is for you. Stay tuned and you'll hear about statistics, scenarios, and strategies on what to do now to get you published. So let's get back to the show. And here again is your host, Dr. Judith Briles.
With me today is former Amazonian Chris McCabe, and we're really talking about some of the Amazon hell, suspensions, getting in jail, how you get out. And we were talking about, just going into this last segment, some of the suspension trends that are happening. Chris mentioned review abuse. I know, Chris, I've drilled into my authors. We need reviews, but they need to be legitimate reviews, and they're not coming from friends. I swear that the bots know if you guys are connected on Facebook or whatever, they seem to ace them out, even though the book's been bought. I don't know how to get around that, but that happens all the time. And you may have some insight on that. I don't know what.
The family and friends, people don't do that typically as much anymore, just because they understand that Amazon has ways of tracking IP addresses associated with buyer accounts. So typically a buyer leaves a positive review, and it's after they've made, there are different kinds of product reviews. There's unverified and verified. Naturally verified reviews where there's an order number associated with that review, those carry more weight in Amazon's algorithms. So the preference is friends or family buy a product from you and positively rate it or review it. That went on for years. I understand a lot of people built product launches around friends and family, kind of giving them a bit of a boost. But that is something to be avoided now because Amazon is able to associate IP addresses with buyer accounts that are going to appear related to the seller themselves. It could be because they're in the same household. It could be because they're in the same office or business. A lot of business employees were getting in trouble, like this was part of their job, was to rate their orders on Amazon for those brands and products. But those IP addresses, of course, I mean, just imagine pre-COVID, everyone sitting in an office somewhere using the same network. The IP addresses would be associated with each other on top of, things like location and maybe even the email domain. Maybe they were using their business domains for their buyer accounts as well. So they would see that and see that they all worked at the company, and they would strike those.
Yeah, you get zapped. Yeah, I mean, you get zapped. Okay, so anything else out of the trends that we need to? We have reviews, we have late orders. That means you're shipping them, and they're getting too late, and you're getting your hand slapped. That's what's happening here. Anything else that we should be tuned into? Definitely for people that own their own brands. And I like how you mentioned before the break about protecting yourself from competitors or from bad behavior, because unfortunately, that was an excellent point you made, because bad behavior is rampant right now. And Amazon is steadily kind of, turning the ship very, very slowly away from the iceberg here. They haven't quite built the teams or the processes to prevent such bad behavior from flourishing. What that means is you have to know how to complain about that just as much as you need to understand how to complain if your appeal for reinstatement is being ignored. You have to get eyeballs and attention on it the same way, because they are overwhelmed with complaints of a competitor brand is attacking us. We don't know exactly which one it is, but we were flooded with negative reviews overnight or negative ratings. Sometimes brands are even complaining to us that their actual detail page is changing against their will. So they'll wake up and they'll see that their images have been swapped out for some other product, or text on the detail. I'm talking about live on the site. So somebody is actually manipulating internal loopholes and Amazon's tools. They're manipulating those by adding content to a listing themselves, or somehow manipulating contributions to that listing to deface how that brand is represented on Amazon.
obviously that's a more extreme example, but this does happen. And I would say at least once a week I have a phone call with a brand about that. It's simply because Amazon has loopholes in a lot of their processes and a lot of their tools. And unfortunately, so-called black hat competitors will learn what those loopholes are. They could be joining groups, like a pay-in group, like a mastermind. They could be in certain Facebook groups where these black hat tricks are traded around. They might just hear about it from another seller, a friend, word of mouth, whatever. They find out how to manipulate things, and they go after it because they know they can draw revenue away from you and towards them. And Amazon's very, very slow to identify and respond. And sometimes they simply say, we will look into this. We can't tell you the results of our investigation. That's, proprietary. We will look into this and review it and take action if necessary. Very, very unsatisfactory answer. So as a brand owner, you have to be on top of all of your pages, all of your product reviews, anything around how your brand appears on Amazon. You have to be controlling that and watching it all the time.
Okay, so this makes me just a tad uncomfortable. So someone is able to log in to a detail page, whether it's an author, whether it's selling soap, fill in the blank. They have got access to your login, someone's login, the owners, and their details, and they can go and manipulate that. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, they're not hacking.
That's not what I'm hearing.
It's not
they're
what's
not
commonly
hacking.
known as hacking. Yeah.
Okay.
This is
so
more
what are they doing?
Catalog abuse. There's a few different ways of doing it. They're either manipulating Amazon internal teams to believe that they're the rights owner, the brand owner, when they're not, and they're trying to make contributions to that detail page, and sometimes doing it successfully. They could also be using keywords to, sometimes people load listings using flat files. I mean, usually they use flat files to load their detail pages, content into Amazon, syncing up to Amazon's
Copy,
API,
paste,
of course.
Copy, paste,
Yep.
we all do it. Yep.
But if they leave vacant fields, occasionally other parties can come in and try to insert something into that field, which will attract a bot to suspend the listing, to take it down. So they'll put in a word like, pesticide, or they'll put in a word like cannabis. Anything that would attract a bot, trigger something to happen where the listing would be taken down. So these tools are porous. You would think as a brand owner, all you have to do is register your trademark, get into Amazon's brand registry, and then you 100% control all contributions to that listing and that detail page. Unfortunately, we've seen many, many examples where that's not the case. And it's kind of hard to figure out why certain attacks go through, because obviously you can't see, you don't have any visibility into Amazon's tools or why their teams did what they did. Usually it's just a form of manipulation. The catalog team's been tricked into doing something. It's some sort of catalog abuse that Amazon let pass through. And you can fix these things. It just might not be fixed right away. You might spend a few days fixing it, which is why the black hat attackers use that technique in the first place. They know they'll at least siphon 3 or 4 or 5 days of sales away from you. And if it's going to be lucrative for them to do it, they'll keep doing it.
So these are called black hat attackers. Is that what you call them?
Right. So I started at Amazon as a fraud investigator. The reason I worked at Amazon in the first place was because I had a background in fraud prevention, other kinds of e-commerce marketplaces, other online fraud. So in the fraud prevention investigator world, there's white hats, which are us. We're preventing the fraud. And there's the black hats, the fraudsters that are out there continually pivoting and changing their techniques and tactics to try to get around how they win money or, steal money basically from sales. It could just be, if you go back 20 years when I started doing fraud prevention, it was just basic credit card fraud and trying to manipulate online sales using somebody else's credit card, but changing the address to make sure product was shipped to you. 2 decades later, obviously, common. It's a lot more sophisticated. Very common. Yep.
Well, I don't know if you've heard about this, but this is a variation of this. Over on Goodreads, I wrote a blog on the trolls that are over there, and they are holding authors hostage with the threat that if you don't give us Bitcoin, we are going to post god-awful, unbelievably numbers of bad reviews. That's one of the latest little games. So,
sure. Not even necessarily that new, because people were doing this with Yelp years ago. with restaurants
Yes.
and cafes.
Yes.
We'll post a bunch
Yes.
of reviews saying that your food was full of cockroaches or that the bathroom was unsafe. We slipped in the bathroom and almost cracked our head on the sink. I mean, there's been stuff like that going on for, a long time. The things that we see are usually specific to Amazon because they know where to hurt you, how to hurt you, what will last the longest, what will be the hardest for you to troubleshoot and figure out. And I know this is kind of murky for people that aren't used to being attacked by fraudsters or have their brand misrepresented either on Amazon or anywhere really. But these are realities that people that start selling on Amazon need to learn very quickly. Maybe that's a conversation for another day because there's kind of a handbook you almost have to create mentally for how to protect and defend yourself. With Amazon, the problem is the company itself doesn't have your back. They don't run in and rescue you with a cape flying in the wind to save the day whenever you're attacked by a competitor. You have to keep pushing them to take the action. You have to remind them that they haven't responded to you. You have to put it back in front of them and pressure them to understand that you're being attacked. You've had the same listing, suspended, then reinstated, and suspended again over and over for a few weeks. It's costing you money, and it's disrupting the presence of your brand on Amazon. And that's not what Amazon's marketplace is supposed to be about. You're not supposed to be focused on defending yourself and looking over your shoulder all day. You're supposed to be growing revenue, launching new SKUs, creating new products, and developing and growing your brand on Amazon, at least in theory. So
got it. Well, the bottom line is what I'm hearing you say is you got to be a vigilante.
Yes. You have
really
to watch.
Pay attention.
You have to protect your own interests is kind of a nicer way of saying it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We have like 90 seconds. What should we be looking for Amazon's holiday peak season? We're in it right now.
Right. So communication. Make sure your communication's top notch. If Amazon doesn't respond to you within the allotted time frame, whether it's 24, 48 hours, 72, make sure you've got something already written, already in the can, ready to go if they don't answer you. Because during Q4, especially November, December, it takes them a lot longer to respond to things. Okay. Or they might respond very quickly with general canned templates like you mentioned earlier, which is not a response. It's the non-response response. Have something ready to go in advance to counter that.
All right. So with that said, we have to do another call, I have to tell you. We're just starting. Chris McKay, thank you so much. You can find Chris at ecommercechris.com. If you're using Amazon, which I know you all are, you got to protect yourself, especially now. We'll talk to you. See you next week on AuthorU, your guide to book publishing.
Thank you for being a part of Your Guide to Book Publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. With your host, Dr. Judith Briles.